Welcome to MaiCoin. Today we're going to discuss Libra coin, the good or the bad. This is not investment advice.
Okay, so this is really complex. There's a lot of different levels to this and layers to it, and the more you go down this rabbit hole, the more there is to talk about. So we're going to keep it really high level and just look at the good and the bad. So starting from the good, I think the interesting thing about this is it marks a technology-driven challenge by a big tech company into an industry traditionally dominated by very old companies. So Barclays, JP Morgan, Goldman, these are all companies that have been around for 100 or 250 years. So it's very interesting to see big data, to see tech companies coming into the space with new ideas and new ways of doing things. Now, the second part of this also is because Facebook is such a big company across so many different countries, that it's going to force global regulators and politicians to really consider some of their attitudes towards digital assets and to look again at some of these regulatory bottlenecks. A famous example is taxation in the US. So everything you do with crypto in the US is a taxable event. Forks, buying, selling, or using crypto to pay for stuff. So I think this could be a potential benefit of having Facebook come into the space. Dan?
Okay, over to the bad. So the first bad point I put under the title of supranational currency. So Libra could be viewed as a supranational currency. Now the problem with that is that if you're living in Europe and there's a financial crisis specific to the Eurozone, anyone who's holding or has the choice of holding euros or Libra will probably pick Libra. The question is, will Europe allow that to happen? And will they allow Libra to grow unchecked? And if at all, I think is the biggest question. The other thing is, whilst Libra is seeking to bank the unbanked, countries under which most of those unbanked lived probably are more likely to suffer from chronic destabilizing inflation and will therefore be more incentivized to regulate Libra away. So maybe this idea of banking the unbanked is a complete myth.
Okay, good number two is legitimacy. So this is a trend we've seen playing out for the last couple of years, is more big institutionals and corporate entities getting involved, not just in blockchain, but in cryptocurrency as well. So some big examples over the last couple of months, JP Morgan issued their JP Morgan coin. We had Fidelity, one of the biggest fund managers in the world with 1 trillion assets under management, getting into the space. And now we have one of the biggest internet companies in the world getting into the space. So I think this adds a lot of legitimacy to the whole space in general.
Okay, the second bad, central banks. Libra is going to be backed by reserve assets from what they describe as reputable central banks. For many people, that could be described as an oxymoron, given the history of central bank missteps, arguably feeding many of the great bubbles of our time. The global mainstream narrative is increasingly questioning central bank policy over the last few years, which has left national debt levels at astronomical levels that have never been seen in the history of mankind, and have arguably failed to stimulate growth to the levels that were expected. Each of these central banks is actively managing their exchange rate as a tool to stimulate growth, or should we say steal growth from their global peers. And this is becoming increasingly a necessity in a debt-laden growth-starved environment. I would argue, as a result, but because of these global macro dynamics, that building a stablecoin upon this entire system seems more risky and possibly futile than it might appear at first glance.
Okay, good number three is kind of a philosophical thing. I think Facebook's entry into this space stimulates a broader discussion on what's the nature of money. What should be the role of central banks? What has been their role previously? Has it been positive or negative? What are the root causes of inflation? And who can issue currency or money? Is it only governments? Can it be companies? Can it be internet protocols? These are all really interesting discussions, I think.
Okay, so over to the third bad I put under a title regulation. Bitcoin and other digital assets or securities have mostly managed to grow largely unscathed, and I think part of that is that growth has happened at a measured pace, so regulators have been fairly hands-off with the growth so far. Now with the advent of Libra coin, which is going to leverage Facebook's more than 2 billion users, I think for the first time we have the ability to create a supranational currency that could scale to a level that could compete with many existing large national currencies of, say, the G7 or the G20. And that could happen almost overnight. Now, if central banks and governments see this as a threat, the threat might be big enough to drive sort of regulatory coordination on a level that so far we have yet to have seen. And this could not only stop Libra in its path, but may also be a huge impediment to the growth of other cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin.
Okay, good number 4 is the one that everyone's waiting for. It's the big one. It's the possibility of Libra bringing more liquidity, more money into the overall digital asset space. Possibly by allowing a more convenient fiat to crypto conversion. So if you read the white paper, it reads a lot like initially it's going to be quite siloed. Some of the interviews I've seen since then have maybe they've got an intention to become more decentralized over time. We'll see how that plays out. If they are able to list Libra on other exchanges, if people are able to self-custody it, then it does become a stable coin, and it could be a big deal. And it'll be essentially a lot like a USDT, where people can use it to trade Bitcoin or other digital assets. The big difference, of course, being the scale. With 2 billion users globally, it'll be a lot bigger than anything we've seen before and can bring a lot of liquidity.
And the last part of the bad is probably trust. Even if we ignore the multiple cases of privacy abuse by Facebook with regards to its user data, which have happened over the last few years, there still remains a huge political backlash against this company, with many calls within political circles across the globe to break up not only Facebook but big tech more broadly. Do we think politicians will support Facebook's move from being a titan of social media to being a titan of global finance? I think that's a really big question, and the answer may be not. That sort of concludes our sort of top-down overview of the good and the bad. We should just note that MaiCoin is very agnostic to the Libra coin. We welcome Facebook's foray into the digital currency space, and we eagerly await more details over the coming months. This is going to be a super exciting 12 months for the whole space, not just Libra, but Bitcoin and all other digital assets, with so much happening right now. Thanks for visiting MaiCoin. Have a great weekend. Bye-bye.
If you find this video useful, don't forget to hit subscribe.